Cheers.
Cheers.
Welcome to Culture Night.
Where we drink fancy wine and watch movies that are in some way culturally significant.
We're excited to get started. So what are we drinking tonight?
This is the 2014 Tobin James Fat Boy Zinfandel. Not sponsored. Could be if you want to be. And
shout out. It smells great from the bottle. It was like right on the nose.
Yeah, just a lot going on in the nose. Like a lot of berry.
I know, I'm sorry, I jumped the gun. It was just, I couldn't wait anymore.
Almost like it's like a chocolatey smell, but I don't know.
It kind of like punches me in the nose a little bit. There's a lot of smell, unlike some other wines we've had.
Yeah, like raspberry.
It's got a little bit of that like sour acidity to it. It is a little strong in the alcohol flavor, but it also could be because it's from 2014, so it's aged a little bit.
We're not the best at like keeping a nice like wine cellar. We just have a lot of wine. You know, it's boxed up, not getting a lot of sunlight, but probably could be better about that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not one of the worst ones we've had.
For sure.
Yes, delicious.
So what are we watching tonight?
Tonight we were watching The Graduate, and
It's from 1967.
I think so.
Something like that.
From my light research I did, aka finding out what year it was from. So, what do you know about The Graduate?
I know that Jack Black talks about it in The Holiday. That Dustin Hoffman is in it.
I feel like
And that is it.
Yeah, like it's referenced a lot, so I feel like I know of it, and I know there's a character named Mrs. Robinson, and that's like those are the two things that I know about it. So
Yeah, no idea what to expect. I assume it takes place after someone graduates, maybe.
I will say I'm surprised it was in the 60s, because in my mind it was kind of in that like mid 80s, late 80s setting, because I obviously know nothing about this movie. So when I saw 67, that really takes my expectations way back. I have no idea what to expect.
Yeah. So
Obviously we haven't seen it before. That's my other question is, have you seen it before?
definitely not seen it before. Neither of us have seen it.
We have not seen it. We don't really know anything about it except that it's referenced a lot. And yeah, I think that's pretty much about sums it up. So ready to dive in?
Yep. Let's go.
The Graduate.
Record scratch. We're total newbies and realized we entirely forgot to introduce ourselves in our first ever podcast episode. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Sarah.
And we are recording this podcast in order to culture ourselves and learn more about movies in general. I've seen a lot of movies. I've not seen most of the classics. I
have seen a lot of movies, but not a lot of the popular movies. I feel like
I've seen most movies. You've seen a lot of DComs and not.
I've seen a lot of very specific genres.
Not to say we won't culture ourselves with some DComs, but
yes. So we are culturing ourselves. We are seeing the movies that we feel like we need to see, that are referenced a lot in shows and movies and everyday conversations, I guess.
Yes.
And
we'll be uploading this on YouTube and hopefully all of the main podcast platforms.
Cheers. I'm sorry, all I can do is laugh.
Well, of all the movies that I've seen, that is certainly one of them. I don't know what I expected going into that, but
I mean, I knew
that was not it.
I knew that it was like older woman, younger guy.
The whole Mrs. Robinson thing, I was like, I feel like there's like some sort of like, you know, MILF cougar vibe going on in this.
Yeah.
And there was, but there was also
I honestly don't even know
a
what to
lot
say.
more going on there.
That was a movie.
I guess let's try running down the questionnaire and then we'll switch over to just the
general
notes and stuff. So, as a movie, rating 1 to 10.
Oh God.
All right, what do you think of that? Wine as a rating 1 to 10 overall.
Wine 7.
I'm gonna give it an 8.1. I was thinking about this, yeah. Just because I did really like the nose and the like initial experience of it. It was a little bit of alcohol forward. Getting into it, it got a little bit better. It's nicer than like a lot of wines that I've had, obviously. Tobin James does make very good wines. Please sponsor us. But I will say it was not my favorite. I've had like more of a Cab Franc guy, more of a Petite Syrah guy. But
And I think that's why I gave it a 7. Is like it was really great for what it was. That like I love a Petite Syrah or a Syrah or a Cab Franc, or like there's some wines that I've had where it's just like, wow, this is like punch me in the face, exactly what I want. And this was great for like.
This is no longer that. This is a this is Black Box.
This is really
this is
classic.
a Black Box.
Petite Caps.
Yeah, petite Cab Sav.
Because we just needed more after that.
Yeah, it's like I almost need like a cigarette like after that, like they all had in there.
I know. I need like one of their 50,000 cigarettes.
Yeah,
I'd say like I'd maybe give it like a 7.4 if I were to. I didn't know we were giving points.
If I'm just watching this movie today.
No, I'm talking about the wine. I'd bump it
Back to wine,
7.4 if we were doing points. I didn't know.
points,
I thought we were doing whole numbers. Okay.
That was the number that came to me.
Yes.
Movie. I'm gonna give it a. You said 7.44 for the wine. I'm thinking 7.4 for the movie. It would be way less, except for the ending was bonkers. That was bananas.
the last like 90 seconds.
Like I just
really changed.
It was weird. It had a lot of vibes, and then it just went off the rails, and I still don't quite understand. Especially, I can't imagine watching that in 1967.
That gets back into some of my other points, but I think as a number. I mean, I kind of want to give it a 6.9, but it feels fitting, does it not?
Yeah.
Oh man, Rotten, what's a 7.7 up there? I would say
the little zipper between the D and the U there, it does seem a little more risque now. Like it gives those kind of vibes that I really didn't know what to think going into it, but.
So an actual number, I would say I'll be less gross and give it a 6.8. I think I've seen better movies, and I think it's really hard to not watch it with the like 2022 lens of like how different it would be now.
Yeah, that's true.
That like I don't know that it hits a full 7 for me.
Yeah, taking out the fact that like we know it's like a classic, I would say it's definitely in like the 5 to 6 range. There was a lot of stretches where it was just kind of weird, kind of slow and boring.
Lots of slow, weird, like montage scenes where they like you can tell they were trying to be really tricky with like the cinematography and the shots and the transitions, especially like him in the bed with the like fabric behind him. And then it would zoom in really close, and then it would zoom out, and he had like different fabric, but it looked the same. But it was just like
I almost want to go back and see some of the transitions because I was
paying really close attention.
Well,
to them.
let's come back to that.
I have so much to say. Oh my god!
Let's get through like the initial questionnaire,
questions, yes.
and then we'll go back to the notes because I do want to touch on that. Is it what you expected? I'm gonna say sort of, but I also didn't know what to expect. But like.
My initial response to that was yes and no.
For the first 20 minutes, but I didn't expect it to be on that timeline. I expected it to be more of like a building up to that kind of thing, if anything.
I expected the first 20 minutes to be the last 20 minutes.
Yeah, to be like the build up to the movie. Yeah.
From what I'd known in the like references that I had heard, I imagined it built like a slow build up of like them being like kids and Mrs. Robinson being like, oh, I know you. Oh, I'm older now, you're coming on to me, like more of that kind of buildup instead of like, oh, you're graduated,
the initial scene party is,
and like you could spot her right away at the party. It was like, oh, she's obviously the one.
Put her in focus in the background, not too subtle. But also like leaving your own party for all, like no one asked like where's he going with, like, lots of weird. But
that seems less weird thinking of the 60s though. It was very much a party for the parents, not a party for the kid.
True. Did they say the name of the movie in it? Maybe in the like at the party they might have said, "Oh, there's The Graduate." I don't know. I didn't really even think about it.
Yeah, I was still trying to figure out what like. I feel like it was just a lot of close-up shots at the beginning, and that was distracting me from what was really going on in the story. Yeah,
there wasn't a clear like, "Hey, you're the graduate," like there are in some other movies where they very clearly say it.
Yeah.
Were there any actors who went on to bigger things or were in a role you didn't expect? Feeny for sure.
I mean, was that not the first thing I said when this movie started? Like,
did you know he was in it before you heard his voice?
Yeah, because we were on the screen and I saw him.
Okay.
But
I'm still impressed because that's a very unmistakable voice once you've heard it.
I will also say I'm deep in the Pod Meets World podcast rewatch. I mean, I've not been rewatching the show. I've seen a couple episodes recently that like they've been talking about Feeny so much that it is been at the forefront of my mind in the last couple of weeks that maybe if I hadn't been like thinking about it more recently, I wouldn't have been as quick to jump to it. But I mean, his voice is unmistakable.
100%. It's just also weird because a lot of the people we saw in the movie are like very much like older in the movies. Whereas like if they're like 60 plus in that movie, they'd be dead today.
Very, very dead.
Very dead. It was weird talking about being like about the actor and being like, oh, he's like in the present tense. Talking about him in the present tense is kind of weird because most of the people in that were like are dead by now, and he is getting up there. He's like in his 90s.
95, I think.
But like that was very much Feeny, and I did not expect to see him until you said, I think that's Feeny.
And I will also say, having listened to an interview of him on the show, on the Pod Meets World show, I believe they mentioned this in it. So I think it was kind of like, oh, I think they talked about that, like all kind of connecting things in my brain once the movie started.
Yeah.
But yeah, Feeny was the biggest surprise for sure.
How well did it age / could it be made today? I feel
like those are two separate answers.
So some of the things like how well did it age, fairly well, honestly. I think are a lot of movies that were made, especially in the last, like, if you went back in time 5 years, I think there are a lot more movies that were kind of this same vibe of like the whole like, oh, we don't know him, but like it's clearly love. But I feel like in the last like 5 years, or I guess even longer, it's been a while since like Frozen really came out, but I feel like a lot of like movies have really been kind of trending towards the whole like, maybe you shouldn't just like love this person that you know nothing about and that you just met, or like, don't really haven't talked to before.
But on a different note though, I think like the fact that in 1967, older woman preying on younger man, scandal, like absolute scandal. 2022, probably less, I mean, still not like super cool, but like way, way less scandalous than it would have been in the 60s.
Yeah, I almost feel like it couldn't be made then. It's less likely it would be made in the 60s.
And I think because it was made then is why it's so popular, is because it was this like, oh my God, scandalous premise. Whereas today I feel like it would probably have stood out less because I think things are less shocking nowadays. So, I mean, one of my notes was like, I think if it was made today, obviously there are definitely people out there like Benjamin who are like really timid and like
until he has sex, and then he's apparently like very confident and very rapey,
and who would be easy to manipulate. Like, I think if it were to be made today, that the dude would probably be a lot. If someone was writing this movie today, they would write the character to be like, oh, absolutely, I'll like bang this older woman because like that's something I've always fantasized about. Whereas like I think it was a lot more like, oh, that never even crossed my mind. Oh my gosh, I couldn't even.
Very more taboo.
Yeah. Hold on, what was the
could it be made today?
Could it be made today?
How well did it age?
How well did it age? I think like it's hard to watch it because I did the math and it's like almost 50 years old now. That being like, oh, the payphones and the cigarettes and the like just like so much of like the technology and like those kinds of things, it was distracting in that it would be kind of different today. Yeah. But I think the premise of it wouldn't stand out as much.
Yeah, but some movies like literally could not be made. Like Home Alone, it's like, oh, they would just like use a smartphone and called someone. Like this, it's more like a lot of the stuff kind of still could have happened in like
the relationships.
Technology and like current social norms didn't totally destroy it, but like the social norms are kind of trending towards like destroying it.
I do think the social norm of like, oh, she went on one date with this guy, with Benjamin, and like then was like, maybe I'll marry you, but then 2 days later married somebody else, but then like that would all that doesn't happen.
That was
we were not scandalous, but like we got married within like a year and a half of dating.
We said they had known each other longer in the movie, but like
that like people were like, oh, you're kind of rushing it. That like this was like
there was a little bit less or different circumstances when we met.
Yes, we are not these people.
I do want to say the beginning part, like with the whole excuse that sound, With the whole like MILF, like cougar vibe thing. The weirdest thing was like, imagine that situation, like genders reversed, where it's like older man seducing younger girl, and that would have felt like a lot darker and like, you know, creepier vibes. But because it's like, oh, it's you know, older woman seducing younger good looking guy, good looking girl, it's like, oh, it was, you know, totally fine, and like he's a lucky guy. That part to me in the beginning was kind of like really like, this should be a lot creepier than it seems.
Yes, and just I have 2 quick thoughts. I mean, it is creepy as a woman. It's creepy thinking about being that controlling over a younger male. Like, that's weird. But having listened, since rewatch podcasts are all the rage and everybody's like watching these shows in the past and reflecting on how things are different now than they were then, that it very much feels like this is something that was like written by a male who was like, this would be awesome to have this older woman like I feel like it seems like it's like a male fantasy of like, this older woman loves me and like wants to have sex with me and all of this kind of stuff, that it felt more of like, it was just a couple of dudes that were like, oh, wouldn't this be so crazy if this story happened, as opposed to like, oh, this is something that like,
it's like, oh, you bang the mom and then you bang the girl. Like, yeah,
it feels more of like a fantasy, like, oh, I'm just gonna make this like into a movie kind of thing. That was my like one of my takeaways early on.
Yeah, but what's wild though is that like, she says that she's like almost twice his age. He's 21, which makes her like, we'll say about 39. That's not that much older than we are. Which like, yeah, that's what's jarring to me. It's like, I'm like, okay, that makes this a really different light when it's like, she's the older woman, and I'm like, she's in her 30s, we're in our 30s.
No, okay, but like, how old is she actually?
Okay, well, you look that up to avoid any radio silence. I'm gonna say though, like, it was really weird seeing Dustin Hoffman being so young, because he's just kind of always been like that, like late middle-aged, like older kind of guy my entire life.
Okay, but he was 30 when this movie came out.
Playing a 21-year-old, that kind of tracks.
So I mean, I was not expecting him to be 30 years old, because that's old. That is how old. Or I mean, I'm 31. You're 32. Yeah. Like, that's closer to how old we are now.
But what's weird is he sounded a lot like David Schwimmer / Adam Driver. Looked kind of like Jorma from Long Island, but also sounded kind of like John Candy. Like, especially in the scenes where the lights were off, I was like, sounds like this could be John Candy playing this voice.
She is only 6 years older than him.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, asterisk here.
Scandalous.
Mrs. Robinson is only 6 years older.
So then she would have been 36, maybe 35 when it was filmed.
Yeah.
It's like 3 years older than I am now.
She looks old. I mean, truly, I feel like everybody in that era dressed themselves way older than we do now.
Yeah, dressed themselves, but like, you look at her skin and she didn't seem that old. Like,
for sure.
Old.
Speaking of looking at her skin, her tan lines, I could not. I feel like that's something that like nowadays everyone's like, oh, you don't want tan lines, you don't want tan lines. But I feel like before it was like, oh, look how tan I am. Like, that it was.
I'm glad you said though that it was 30, because I was gonna say he looked old even though he's like super young. It almost kind of felt like a deep fake in some points where it's just like, I know that's Dustin Hoffman. He almost seems like he's like CGI reverse aged, but that makes more sense that he's like 9 years older than he was supposed to be, which is a significant, difference there.
Yeah. Imagine you 9 years ago versus now.
Very different people. No beard, no nothing.
Especially for dudes. I feel like a 9-year difference in
But his hair was like super freaking thick. I don't know if that was like a wig or something like that, but his hair was just like,
he still seems to have good hair for my quick Google search.
Yeah, but he also has a lot more money now, so he could have like bought some nice hair
true.
So I think like a lot of this, though, that we kind of touched on already, was there's a lot of like unhealthy relationships kind of going on, of the whole like, keeping things a secret, and then the whole like the entire part with the daughter seemed like it was really kind of just like forced in there of like, hey, you haven't really met, you're gonna go on this blind date to a strip club, be humiliated, but then also just start making out. Then you're gonna go to Burger, and then you're gonna have like this super secret lovely relationship. 2 days later, he wants to marry you. Like, very weird.
And that it leans into it's a bunch of male writers that were like, oh, wouldn't this be hilarious? Like, not making it real. Like, you kind of like, maybe older woman could prey on younger dude and make that happen. But then bringing the daughter in, especially in that scenario, in the strip club, I could not believe he took her to a strip club. And all of that, I could not believe.
I was expecting her to like turn around and like punch the stripper or to like punch him or something, which would have been both would have been justified.
1,000%. Oh my god.
Yeah. Just totally uncalled for. But then the whole like, I don't know, their entire relationship was excessively unhealthy. Then she like gets humiliated again when she comes back to school, and he just like stalks her. Now the scene with him like running on the bus, like very cool, like artistic scene, excessively creepy. And then she comes to his apartment and then comes back in the middle of the night randomly, like no real explanation there. A lot of like really unhealthy, like I mean she clearly did not, like her parents had kind of some like stability issues and all that.
Sure.
So like you can kind of see where that comes from, but also like just a lot of unhealthy relationship vibes going on there.
But kind of on those same lines is like, I feel like the whole time I'm watching it, I'm like, this guy obviously needs some kind of therapy. Like he starts off just like on the plane, staring, like not making like he seems
smile, friend.
Yes, he seems super out of it, and he's at this party and like his parents are talking to him but he's not listening. They have the like reveal of that weird scuba suit, which again
unexplained and like no real reference the rest of the movie.
So weird. I don't understand. And he's just like silent and like seems like he's really out of it, that I'm like, something is going on. Why is he so upset? Like he needs some kind of therapy or support or someone to talk to, because
it really felt like a serial killer origin story, like a whole like here's the background to why he started like killing a family.
He needs a lot of help. He's got to work through some stuff. Obviously he ends up having sex with a mom and daughter, or I guess we assume they get married and go off into the sunset.
Ambiguous, but yeah,
you never know. That like he needs to talk to somebody. He needs some help. And especially like I understand the crisis of like, I graduated college, I don't know what I'm gonna do, and that's totally fine. But like he seemed to an extent of like, I need some help.
That's probably not what you want to do. What he did seems a little bit like,
and Mr. Robinson being like, have some fun, go out there, sow some wild oats. That's not what he meant.
Yeah. Speaking of the song though at the beginning, I feel like there were like 3 songs the whole movie. They had the Sound of Silence like 3 times, maybe 4 times. They had Scarborough Fair like 3 or 4 times, and they had the Mrs. Robinson song.
But I feel like that didn't even come until the very end.
Yeah, play that for like 20 seconds. Like that's like the iconic song of the movie. Like very small in there.
The iconic song of the movie was not that.
Yeah. That it's like, I don't know what the budget was of that movie, but it seems like they didn't want to spend it on the music because they licensed like 2 songs and like that was it.
I think they spent it on the cinematography.
Yeah.
Which, as having spent the last couple of like months and years like learning a lot about cameras and like watching YouTube videos of these photographers and videographers these days, watching this was almost physically painful. The weird like dirty frames, as Becky would call it, of like focusing, like you're focusing on something really close that's really not even like lined up well, like in the hotel when the manager or whatever is just like comes up behind the like weird wooden thing. I don't even know.
They were really going for the artsy shots for sure.
It was trying to be 10 times more artsy than it needed to be for what the movie actually was. And it was just like all the weird, like we're really out of focus and then we're really in focus. Or
what's funny to me was a lot of the like what nowadays would be drone shots where like he's driving across the bridge and they've got like what would now be a drone following him. Like they had to pay for a helicopter. Like that's a lot more overhead than being like, oh, you're just gonna go fire this drone up. We're gonna track you as you go across. Maybe pay like a fee to the city for like filming rights or something like that. But it's a lot more overhead to get a freaking helicopter out. It's to do another flight, so another take. You gotta fly the helicopter all the way back around, drive the car back. They had several of those.
They did have a lot of those. What also killed me though was the like slow, like I'm focusing on you, but then I'm gonna focus on something closer, and the very slow to come into focus of what was like what they were trying to transition to. It almost hurt my eyes to watch. Of just like I'm just not used to that like taking so long.
The scene where the Mrs. Robinson was in the hallway.
That's what I'm thinking.
And it's also like it's changing focus, and you're just like, wow, she's kind of far away. Oh, she's really far. Oh, she's really far away. She's really far down that hall. It was just very odd. And she, I thought she was gonna like stab him or something at that point. It was very, very ominous vibes.
Also, I'm just gonna take right here to talk about how I'll insert a clip. Hopefully, this captures it of us watching the video of how I felt like I watched the whole movie like my eyebrows hurt right now. Like these lines, these creases in between my eyes hurt because I felt like I watched it with my eyebrows furrowed the whole time because I just could not believe what I was watching. Not that it was scandalous, in that I just did not believe how the story was playing out.
It just seemed like 4 movies in one.
Yes.
It couldn't really figure out what it was going to be. It almost felt like it really wanted to be like a serial killer, like horror movie, but it also wanted to be like a super artsy, over the top, like film school project, while also being like a love story, while also being like some sort of porno. Maybe more than that. Like, it was just so much where I'm like, what are you trying to be? And the end is like a comedy where he's just like in the wedding, where he like shoves
the wedding.
the cross
Chef's kiss
into
on
the
the
door
end
to
of the
lock the entire family in the church and then drives off. I almost thought he was gonna like throw like a Molotov cocktail in there or something at that point. It was just very
Honestly, I was a little
unexpected.
disappointed that it ended then. And that's where I was like, this is when it's starting to get good. I want to see how everybody in the church, how do they get out? Like, how does Mrs. Robinson react?
Is there
to
a
this?
sequel?
I have so many questions. I have so many questions on how it ends. The ending was honestly the best part. The whole beginning of the movie, I was just confused of what was happening. The end was hilarious and amazing.
So that's all of the notes that I do. Any more notes?
I don't.
Oh, I do want to say the scene where he was joins her on the bus. It was very creepy, but it was very kind of like interesting to think they did that in one take where he's running all the way down the entire block. The bus stops. It's everything's still focused on her. He gets on the bus, comes around, like sits down, and like talks with her. That's all one take. Very cool. Weird time to use that sort of like shot in any movie. Like, this kind of seemed much more stalkerish, and like if you play that same scene with like some like, you know, creepy music, entirely different vibe for that scene. Entirely different.
Yeah. I don't have any other notes, but I think I do feel like the movie would have been like an easy 7-8 if he'd murdered Elaine in the end. Like, I think that like easily would have taken it to
That's
just,
where
like,
it was tracking towards.
a great, like, completely unexpected end, because he has serial killer vibes. Especially, I feel like 60s, 70s, 80s, where all those like serial killers. I mean, it still happens today, not as like scary, I think, as then. Like, he had those vibes, and if he had just come in and just like, it would have been
The alternate ending.
much
They get on
better.
the bus. They kind of have that weird like smile, kind of starts fading vibe. Music's like whatever. He takes a knife, just stabs her. Music plays the Mrs. Robinson song as he walks off the bus, and she's just sitting there bleeding out, being like, "What the fuck have I walked into?" I think that could be.
I mean, there are a lot of
A more
good alt
interesting ending.
endings. Anyone where Elaine gets murdered would have been excellent.
Yeah.
We could. I mean, it had a lot of like a thriller vibes that I was really expecting that. But yeah, and I feel like now the more that we've talked about it, it's not at all what I expected it to be. Especially the daughter. Bringing the daughter in was. I mean, I guess I should have expected it, but I just like wasn't ready for that.
Yeah.
Yikes. I will say, and I said this to you while we were watching it, like, I'm really glad that we have seen it now, because now I'm, especially like you mentioned the holiday, like we watch that every year, that like to go back and hear some of those references and to actually know what it's about. I'm
Now I want to like talk to like
my
my parents, anyone else who's seen the movie, and be like, "What?
Exactly.
What do you think now?" And like, "What did you think then?" Because I think there's a lot more to unpack there.
And I was thinking, like, my mom was like 13 when it came out. My dad was 19. And just like
My parents were like 8.
Yeah. like obviously I don't think you saw it then. And especially like my mom and your parents. I mean, I'm sure my dad probably saw it. That like to get that kind of generation's vibe on that, I'm very curious.
Yeah.
And again, and like I think the biggest takeaway from all of it is I was not expecting it to be set or to be in the 60s. And
Be set in the 60s in the current time for that.
I
I didn't
was
realize it
not
was that
expecting it to be that old of a movie. And
Yeah, if you'd asked me before, like I started watching it, I would have said like 82 is what I would have guessed based on what I've heard people talk about the movie.
kind of like the Say Anything era.
Yeah.
Like was what I was expecting. And so like that changes everything about the movie. Like how, and I think like how scandalous it would have been at the time. Like I would love to like almost go back and read reviews like in the newspaper from the time, because I just feel like this movie must have been so scandalous. And nowadays I feel like people would be like, okay, like it just like that.
Yeah.
that
It'd
shock
definitely be less
factor is not
remarkable,
there.
but like it's still I think had some scandal and vibes and a lot of
For sure.
weirdness.
And I think the scandal would be different. The scandal now would be
scandals for different reasons.
the scandal of Mrs. Robinson and Benjamin would not be
Mm-hmm.
the thing now. It would be Elaine just like marrying him after 2 days.
I think there still would be some scandal about that, but it'd be more like predatory as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, oh my goodness, this younger man took advantage of this older woman, or like
We live in the age of consent now.
Yeah.
Like you have to say yes, and he was not. I mean, he didn't. I mean, he's the one that called her, but like
he definitely said no several times, and she kept telling him to sit down. There was a lot of predatory behavior on her
yes,
part.
oh for sure. So, whew, this was a cultured night. I feel cultured now.
Yeah, that was literally about to say. Do you feel more cultured having watched that?
Abs, 100%. So
Right.
cultured.
And it was a successful culture
Yes.
night.
Cheers.
Cheers.
See you next week.